Hey there, it's Lara here with your weekly astrology forecast. This one is for the week of August 25th to the 31st, 2021. Welcome. Thanks for being here. I cannot believe that it's essentially the end of summer. Summer just, I feel like I blinked and I missed it. It was gone. Um, I mean, the weather's still really hot here, and the kids don't officially go back to school until September 7th. So, let's not wish our lives away. But we are now officially in Virgo season, and Virgo season marks the transition, right, between two seasons. And in the Northern Hemisphere, that, which is where I live, is between the transition, from summer to fall. So we're going to talk about that in today's video and the implications for that for all of us. So the sun just entered Virgo on the 22nd, and it will be there until September 22nd. So a month, and that is, that's what we would consider Virgo season. Wherever the sun goes is sort of how we track that, right? I am a little bit scattered today. We just got back from the lake last night, and as usual, there's a lot going on, and I'm really tired. I feel like I say that every week, but true story. So I am endeavoring to keep this a little more succinct today. Next week, we're going to dive into the Virgo new moon that's happening. But we're going to talk a little bit about Virgo this week too, and some other things. So I hope you stick around. I hope you subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. And, if you're a longtime viewer, I really appreciate you being here and hanging out with me every week, and, your comments and your support. So let's dive in. We have, as the sun has entered Virgo, like I said, on the 22nd, we have Mercury and Mars still in Virgo as well, while Venus has moved ahead a little, and Venus has entered one of her domiciles, right? One of her homes, in other words. Venus has two homes. One is in Libra and one is in Taurus. So Venus has entered Libra already. And then we will have, the other planets follow suit eventually. But we do have Mercury and Mars still in Virgo right now, as the sun is also there. And Mercury is the ruler of Virgo, right? Not only is Mercury at home in Virgo, Mercury also has two homes. Virgo is one, and Gemini is the other. And we've talked about that in some recent videos that you can go back and listen to if you want. But we talked about the fact that Mercury is not only at home in Virgo, and if you know anything about traditional astrology, then you know that a planet in its domicile or home is truer to form there, right? Because it has the tools it needs to do its job, essentially, to put it simply. It's like, think of yourself when you're at home, right? You have what you need around you. You're more comfortable. You can be more authentic when you're at home. So ideally, of course, but so Mercury's at home. But not only is Mercury at home in Virgo, Mercury is what we call exalted in Virgo. So Mercury, it's like a double strength almost for Mercury there. It's the strongest place in the chart for Mercury to be. Mercury is at home. Mercury is also revered and held up, sort of thing, in Virgo. So Mercury is really able to be true to form and to be, efficient, and to get Mercury things done while in Virgo. So I suggested in a past video we really capitalize on that at this time, right? But Mercury has just come into an opposition with Neptune, who is across the sky in Pisces, Virgo's opposite sign. And they actually came into an exact opposition yesterday, but we're still in the throes of that right now. And we have Mars and the sun to follow. They will also oppose Neptune and Pisces, as they move through Virgo, right? Over the next couple of weeks. So I just wanted to touch on this as one of the things to talk about this week. So with Mercury and Neptune in this opposition, which is, an opposition is this kind of like conversation of push and pull, of a need to compromise in some way, right? And so this can bring a sense of potential fogginess, elusiveness, potentially even deception, or just a lack of clarity in general to that Virgo axis, that Virgo Pisces axis in the chart, right? So wherever Virgo Pisces, which are across the sky from each other, whichever two opposing houses those occupy for you, are the areas that you may feel a little bit of push and pull, a little bit of trying to work out the clarity of something, or to clear up some confusion, right? As each of these planets opposes Neptune, there may be some confusion that needs to be cleared up, or there could also be this kind of pull between the practical and the magical. I really like to think of this Pisces Virgo axis as the axis of practical magic. I have a Virgo rising and a Pisces sun, so I feel this in my own life, right? And Virgo is the practical end of things. Pisces is the magical end of things. And when we bring those two together, it makes me think of this idea of, enchantment, like of the everyday, of bringing a sense of enchantment to our everyday lives almost. So it's a marriage between like the mundane and the imaginative, right? Or the spiritual or extraordinary, and our everyday lives, right? It's like our everyday reality, and then the fantasies we escape off into, right? Those kinds of things. So we could, over this period of time, over the next couple of weeks, as these planets oppose each other, we can be faced with maybe some reality checks, but also with, just a need in general to balance two opposing themes, like what is true and real versus kind of what's too good to be true, right? Or just sort of like maybe a mirage or a fantasy kind of thing. What we want to be true versus what is actually true, maybe these sorts of things. But, it's not all bad. It's not all, sort of delusion and illusion necessarily, and confusion, all those Neptunian words. Mercury is very strong in Virgo, as we were just talking about. And Mercury is there until August 30th, which is Monday. So we have a little bit more time. And then it will move into Libra, and so if we kind of play our cards right, and we're conscious of this energy over this time, it could be quite a nice transit, a beneficial transit in some way, lending to things like really creative thinking, right? Or this sense of like some things that I was thinking about, like pragmatic artistry in some way, if that makes sense. Like taking practical, natural things and turning them into works of art. Or, I think I've used the analogy of like shaker furniture, or that kind of design. It's like another two words we can put together here with this opposition are like feasible fantasy, right? Or realistic dreaming, or our imagination made tangible or real, right? And it all boils down to that notion of like practical magic. And so, and when I think of practical magic, of course there's the book and the movie, right? But as a concept, I feel like one of the things that really hits home for me is like kitchen witchery, right? So when I am in the kitchen, I love to cook. I love sort of all things food. It's a moving meditation for me. It is this sense of like practical artistry or practical magic. And so, you know, and again, like I'm a Virgo rising Pisces sun, so it kind of fits. So, you know, that's the kind of thing that we're working with here over the next couple of weeks with these oppositions to Neptune. And then we have Mercury moving out of Virgo and into Libra on the 30th. And it's in Libra for an extended stay because it will retrograde. Mercury will retrograde in Libra on September 27th. So it's there for a while. Mercury will be in Libra from August 30th until November 5th. So that Libra area of our chart is really getting a going over from Mercury, right? Mercury is sifting through the details there. And we'll talk about that more in a future video, but I just wanted to give you a heads up about that. In general, Mercury in Libra is when our sort of mental focus and potentially our communications, right, shift to themes of things like relating, socializing even, harmonizing, people-pleasing, potentially. And we can have some issues come to the forefront, or we can be thinking a lot or communicating a lot about things like not only relationship, which is a Venus, which is a Libra sort of concept, right? But also things like beauty and equity and justice and harmonizing and mediation, those sorts of things. You know, bringing a sense of balance in whatever area of life or house, in other words, that Libra sits in our chart, right? So again, we'll talk more about that and more about Libra in the weeks to come as we have more planets shifting into that sign. But one more thing I do want to say about that is that Venus currently in Libra is opposing Chiron in Aries. So we're feeling that right now over these last couple of days, and that aspect goes exact tomorrow on Thursday, the 26th. And when we have Venus and Chiron opposing each other, we're likely to see some kind of focus on healing, right? That's the Chiron piece. Healing relationships, healing the dynamics, or just like a focus on the dynamics, maybe difficult dynamics between us and others, right? The self and others. Chiron is in Aries. It's about our individuality and our individuation and our identity. So, you know, we can have this sort of this tension between our identity and our need for harmony with others. And we can also see some issues, because it is Venus at play here, around finances, around beauty and aesthetic, around things like even sexuality, around our self-assertion versus the need to compromise in some way as well. And with Chiron in the mix, it's usually a sign that there is some healing on offer, but it may not always be a comfortable process. Let's put it that way. So I just wanted to give you a heads up about that. Essentially, right, Venus moved through Virgo, is now in Libra. Mercury and Mars are still in Virgo, and the Sun has just entered Virgo. So those three planets, Venus, Mercury, and Mars, they kind of move through Virgo, setting the stage, arranging things, right? For the Sun to enter and the Sun to shine a light on all things Virgo. So that's kind of a visual you can work with. So I wanted to take a couple of minutes to talk a little bit about the archetype of Virgo, and we're going to dive in again to Virgo a little bit more next week when we talk about the Virgo new moon. But seeing as it is Virgo, and Virgo is sometimes a maligned sign, you know, and a misunderstood sign. So I just wanted to spend a little time talking about that and maybe clearing up some misconceptions, that kind of thing. So Virgo is the archetype of, you know, well, the root word there is virgin, right? And I've said this in videos in the past, but for those of you who have, you know, didn't hear me say that before, or have never heard me say this before, that word virgin did not used to mean what we think it means today, or what it means to us today. A virgin was originally someone, a woman generally, who was whole unto oneself, right? A person whole unto oneself was a virgin. And meaning not requiring another person to complete them, right? There's some movie I remember, I don't know, I think it has like, what's his name? Tom Cruise. I think it had Tom Cruise in it, if I recall correctly. But anyways, and there was this line, you know, you complete me, I think. Anyways, that sticks in my head. So that's sort of the opposite of what it means to be a virgin, or what it meant to be a virgin back in ancient times. It was about somebody who didn't need another person to complete them, right? And so you can think of that when you think of Virgo. Virgo is a mutable earth sign. The mutable signs, I already kind of touched on this, but the mutable signs mark the transition between the seasons, right? And in this case, Virgo marks the transition between fall and winter in the northern hemisphere and winter and spring in the southern hemisphere. So in either case, there are preparations being made, right, in order to kind of sustain us through the months, the season that's coming, the season that's on the way. So in the north, and I'll use that because that's my wheelhouse, because I live in the northern hemisphere. You know, it's a time when crops are harvested, for example, and not only are they harvested, but they're processed, right? We separate the wheat from the chaff. That's a very Virgoan thing, is taking away, discarding what is not usable, and then keeping what is useful and doing whatever needs to be done with that. So things like, you know, canning and pickling, you know, these sorts of things happen. It's a time of year when traditionally, I mean, we get away with doing a lot less of that unless we really want to these days, because we live in an age of convenience, right? But when people were out of necessity growing their own food and a bit more self-sufficient, then that's when we can really see this Virgo archetype at work at this time of year in the northern hemisphere, where preparations are being made so that we have what we need to sustain us through the long, cold, dark nights, right, of winter. And in more modern times, we do things like preparing kids to go back to school, right? Going out and buying school supplies or you know, that kind of thing. We tend to, like, one of the things that happens around my house at this time of year is we do less traveling back and forth to the lake, and our house, which has fallen into disarray over the summer months, you know, I pay a little bit more attention to organizing things, and we usually do a bit of a purge and a donation run and all of that kind of thing around this time of year, right? So and a lot of people, like, for a lot of people, summer can be a bit of an indulgent time where there's a lot of, you know, eating and drinking and that kind of thing, and socializing, and relaxing, and then and people go on summer holidays, so they're working less and that, and then when Virgo season rolls around, we sort of start to get back to a routine of some sort, right? And we can cleanse and purge and all these things that Virgo is really good at. Virgo, as a mutable earth sign, strives to do many, like a variety of practical sort of things, well, in order to kind of be of service, but also to create meaning, like to create a meaningful life, right? It's like that's one of the things that Virgo strives for, that I think sometimes we lose sight of that. Virgo is trying to take care of all these things to make meaning. Again, I you know, there is this sense of like, for example, oftentimes people with a strong Virgo signature in their chart will have a connection to nature in some way, and it's a meaningful connection, right? They see nature as providing us with things that we need, right? Or this notion of like, when you do the practical tasks that are required of you, like the harvesting and the pickling and the canning and all of these things, it is, there's a sense of like devotion in those practical actions, right? That whole idea of practical kind of magic, if you will. So, Virgo's not just about being nitpicky and overly, being like overly obsessed with cleanliness and all of this kind of stuff that Virgo often gets pinned with. There can be those tendencies if gone to extremes, but it's not just about that. Virgo is practical. It is down to earth, helpful, very skilled, usually skilled at a multitude of things as well. It's a mutable sign, so it's very adaptable and efficient and analytical and thoughtful. All of these things are Virgo traits. Now, on the shadow side, I touched on a couple of things already. Virgo can tend to be a little bit nitpicky or very critical, hypercritical, towards itself and also sometimes towards others. And sometimes we need, there's a place in the world for criticism. There's a place and a usefulness to being critical thinking, for example, is lost on a lot of people in this day and age, right? That's a necessary skill set. And so, but when it's taken too far, when that criticism is taken too far, it can be damaging to self and to others, right? So that's the shadow side of Virgo. Also, maybe being overly focused on the minutia, right? On the details. And so we lose sight of the bigger picture. Or there can be a paralysis almost that happens. And I've seen this with lots of sort of Virgo type people that I know, and even in myself as a Virgo rising, where you can get so focused on trying to do it right or getting it just so that you're kind of paralyzed into an action, taken to extremes. This is where we see things like people who are hoarders or like that kind of, like, oftentimes perfectionists, we think of perfectionists as people who have everything just so, and that can happen. But sometimes what happens is you're so hell-bent on getting it perfect that you don't do it at all because you're afraid that you're going to mess up, right? Or do it wrong. And so what can happen in these cases is people, you know, they don't do anything. So then they end up living in this, like, in an episode of Hoarders, for example, you know, is one extreme. So those kinds of things can happen when taken to extreme. There can also be indecisiveness, because as a mutable sign, right, ruled by Mercury, there can be overthinking. And so it can be hard to land on a decision. There can be some kind of neurosis that goes on, or some, you know, anxiousness or anxiety. A nervous energy, right? Virgo feels like it always has to be doing something. And so that can cause some anxiousness. So that's the shadow side of Virgo. And then one of the things that could kind of go either way, I guess, it's sort of a neutral trait, depending, would be being self-deprecating. So Virgos often have a really good sense of humor, but it's a little bit dry, and it's often very self-deprecating. Like, Virgo doesn't, you know, at its best, doesn't take itself too seriously. But sometimes this can result, you know, if taken to an extreme, it can be like not accepting the credit where credit's due, not taking, you know, like allowing everybody else to get the props and to shine. And you know, it's like the person working behind the scenes that's actually doing a lot of the work, but is not getting any of the recognition for it. And when recognition is kind of offered up, there can be a sense of, oh, no, like, that's, you know, not me kind of thing. So, you know, sometimes that can be taken to an extreme as well. So the house that Virgo sits in your chart, which we're going to get to in a minute, will mark a particular area of life that your sort of motivation tends to turn towards at this time of year during Virgo season. And if you look at your life as a cyclical kind of pattern, you can really see the astrology come to life, right? Like, you can think about, like, what goes on for you during Virgo season as a general rule. Like, what happens in your life? What things do you tend to focus on? Where does your attention shift? Where do you shine, right? Or what motivates you? What ideal do you seek around this time of year when the sun is in Virgo? And so this is, you know, what's going on. The sun's moving into a particular area of your chart, which draws your attention there over this next month. And we have an opportunity to hit the reset button, right, in the Virgo area of life, sort of as we approach and as we come upon this Virgo new moon that's happening next week, which I'll talk about in next week's video. So I'm going to take it through the signs. I'm going to try to keep this video just a little bit shorter today, but I'm going to take it through the signs. We are talking whole sign houses here. That's what I'm using, just so you know. And we are focusing first and foremost on rising sign, right? So if you know your rising sign or your ascendant, listen for that first. And then you can also listen to your sun sign and your moon sign as well. And those will give you sort of added layers of information. But I want to say before I do that, that if you have planets in Virgo, or if you're a Virgo rising, you know, if you have your sun there, your moon there, any other planets there, or in the other mutable signs of Pisces, Sagittarius, and Gemini, then you're going to have some dynamic or potentially more tense aspects happening, right, between the planets that are moving through Virgo and other planets in your chart. So that's something to pay attention to. If you have planets in the other earth signs of Taurus and Capricorn, those planets will be trining the planets that move through Virgo. And so that is, yeah, you know, those planets will be making harmonious aspects, like these sort of helpful, harmonious conversations happening, right? And if you have planets in Scorpio or Cancer, the sun will sextile those. And a sextile is also a more lighthearted conversation, right? Any conversations happening between planets in Scorpio and Cancer and Virgo will create some potential opportunity for you over Virgo season. So I just wanted to mention that. But what we're looking at here in this particular run through of the signs is what the sun is drawing our attention to over Virgo season, where we are being called to shine, what is motivating us, in general over Virgo season. And then in next week's video on the new moon, we'll talk more in detail about the specifics of the new moon. You can take into consideration, as I mentioned to you, the opposition between Neptune and the planets that are moving through Virgo. So you can take into consideration the house opposite, the house that Virgo sits in your chart, for that piece, that Neptune piece of like where we may have those Neptunian influences coming in from, right? And I'll just touch on that, but I'm not going to go into the details. Listen to the introduction to know how that Neptune piece may play out for you. But I'll give you the house that Neptune is sitting for you, just in case you don't know. We're going to focus on Virgo season and where Virgo sits in your chart first and foremost. So we're going to start with Virgo in this case, because Virgo, it is your birthday month if you're a Virgo sun sign. So happy birthday to you. It's your time to shine, right? You're having your solar return, Virgo. And if you're a Virgo rising, then this is happening in your first house. So this is like a rebirth of sorts for you. And when we have events happening, in the first house, and when the sun moves through our first house of the self, we have an opportunity to shine out into the world, because the first house is representative of us, right? Our physical vitality, our bodies, our appearance, our sort of approach to the world, how we come at the world, how the world perceives us. The first house is kind of all encompassing, right? It's all about us. So it's important when we have transits to our first house. And so with the sun moving through your first house, if you're a Virgo rising, it is what's motivating you right now is how it could be your sense of physical wellness and vitality, right? It could be things like your appearance. So you're motivated to work on some sort of, ideal. Oftentimes when we're talking about the sun, there's this sense of like an ideal vision that we're moving towards almost. And so that can be a bit of a focus for you. You can be working on like, maybe, I don't know, shopping for some new clothes. It could be as simple as that, right? For the upcoming fall season, going through your wardrobe and purging what you don't use anymore, maybe what you haven't worn in the last year, cleaning out closets and that sort of thing, getting ready to sort of face the world, put your best face forward kind of thing. It can be this idea of kind of getting back into like finding center almost, like getting back into a rhythm that feels more grounded and comfortable and ideal for you, right? It can be focusing on you and what you need to kind of sustain yourself, what you have to offer up, how you can shine out into the world, right? All these kinds of things. So if that makes sense to you, if you're a Virgo rising, and of course, if you're, like I said, if you're a Virgo sun, you're having your solar return. And so this is your, this is your birthday month, and you are, you have a chance to sort of be born again, if you will, right? And so if you are curious actually about having a solar return reading, I do those for people. And the solar return is when the sun comes back to the exact degree that it was at when you were born, which doesn't necessarily happen on your birthday every year. Sometimes it does, but it can be sort of a day on either side. But what we do when we look at a solar return chart is we take a snapshot of the chart for that birthday year, for the moment the sun returns to the degree it was at when you were born. And by looking at that, we get an idea of like the flavor of the year, right? That you, certain area, we may see certain areas of focus being really obvious, or themes that may pull focus for you over the course of the year, these sorts of things. So if you're curious about that, you can reach out to me. All right, I think we're going to leave that. Oh, I promised you I would tell you the axis, right? So Virgo, obviously this is happening in your first house. So Neptune is across the sky and Pisces in your 7th house, which is hitting this axis of relationship, of self and other in general. And so this is where you may feel that kind of nebulous influence of Neptune happening, right? It could be coming from other people in your life. Generally, people you're in close personal relationship with. It can be a significant other, it can be business partners and associates, it can be close friends and family members. 7th house also speaks to things like contracts and agreements. So that may also be where this Neptunian kind of influence of either like confusion, delusion, fantasy, or idealism, imagination, magic sort of thing comes from, right? So listen to the intro if you want to know more specifically about that piece. So sun in the first house, and and Mercury's still there, Mars still there, and then Neptune across the sky will oppose all of those planets in turn. So, okay, we're going to move on now to Leo. Leo, with Virgo season comes a focus on your 2nd house generally, right? The sun and other planets are moving through your 2nd house of personal finances. So how you make your money, the skills and talents that you use to sustain yourself in the world, right? To get your basic needs met, to bring in some cash flow, to pay your bills, that sort of thing. But the 2nd house can also speak to things like what we value and our sense of self-worth as well. And so with the sun moving through there, with Virgo season, you are motivated in this area of life to seek maybe some sort of ideal in this area of life. You can shine in this area of life more. You can be a leader, right? The sun sometimes speaks to leadership and authority. You can come into contact with people that are authority figures in this area, kind of thing. That, ideally and potentially could support you. Or you could shine as an authority in some way, in that arena, right, of personal finances, and how you, like I said, get your basic needs met, and that kind of thing, and what you value, your values and sense of self-worth. So there's a focus there for you over Virgo season. And we have that opposition to Neptune going on. So for you, Neptune is sitting across the sky in your 8th house, right, of other people's resources. So money, your partner's money from business contacts. It could be things like debt, taxes, insurance, loans, wills, inheritance, bursaries, scholarships, anything like that, mortgages, those sorts of things. are all eighth house related. It can have to do with this sense of transformation, you know, this cycle of death and rebirth. It can have to do with your psychological kind of depths, right? And are generally, if you've heard me talk about the eighth house before, the phrase that I like best for the eighth house is the eighth house is all about our entanglements with other people. And so this is where Neptune is sitting for you. And so this is where this sense of either confusion, delusion, fantasy, deception, fogginess, or, you know, imagination, magic, spirituality, these sorts of things, right? Can be, there can be a push-pull going on there between the second and eighth house. So as those planets that move through Virgo oppose Neptune and Pisces. So if you want to know the details of that, listen to the introduction, because I spoke more about it there. So that is what's happening for you, Leo. It's a good time, just give you a couple practical things here. Since it is Virgo we're talking about, it's a good time for you to like take stock of your personal finances and get your ducks in a row, as they say. You know, as far as that kind of thing goes, it can be a time. Sometimes it can even be a time where you're focused on. It sounds funny, but like food in the second house. That can be a theme in the second house because it's what we need. It's our basic needs, right? And essentially, and oftentimes, you know, we think of it as a very financial house because, particularly in this day and age, money makes the world go around, right? Unfortunately, but that's how we feed ourselves and put a roof over our heads and all of these things. But it's that general focus. So, you know, it could be like, for example, around here, I know we keep talking about the fact that like we don't have central air, right? So when we cook in the summer, we often do it outside, or we really heat up the house. And so we're talking about at this time of year, like, I love the heat in some ways, but I also can't wait to start like eating things that aren't necessarily grilled every night and getting into that fall comfort food season, right? And my husband's a Leo rising and I have 2 Leo kids. So anyways, that's just I digress. But that is what's going on for you, Leo, and where your attention is being sort of coaxed over this Virgo season. So I'm going to leave that there. I'm going to move on to Cancer now, where we have Virgo in your 3rd house. So this is the time of year when you can see your motivation or your sort of some kind of notion of the ideal vision, where your attention in general is brought to 3rd house themes of your immediate environment. And so like the people and everything that's kind of like swirling around in your immediate environment, right? The 3rd house can be a very busy place. It is often thought of as a house that speaks to things like siblings and you know, peers and community members and friends that feel like siblings. It can have to do with your neighborhood and your community and things like the exchanges that go, like the day-to-day exchanges of even like money and goods, like commerce, you know, or marketing, or just your daily communications. And that can be personal communications, you know, face-to-face conversations, text messages, emails, these kinds of things, right? It can also be a time when there's a focus on education, and this can be like it's usually things like early learning, so elementary school, high school. Like if you're a teacher, as a Cancer rising, this is a time when it can be a really, you know, that back to school focus. If you're a teacher that has kids, it could be a double whammy there. There could be like, you know, so much going on around that, and a lot of communications and things like that are going on, and organizing and, you know, preparing, all those Virgo things, right? Your immediate environment. And there can be this you know, the third house can also speak to sort of like short commutes or short jaunts or day trips or weekend trips or those kinds of things. Transportation in some way, like I already mentioned, commerce and that kind of thing as well. So, you know, and then you have Neptune across the sky in your ninth house in Pisces. So Neptune, you know, that we talked about in the intro, listen to the intro for the details on that Neptune opposition piece. But Neptune there bringing a sense of, you know, some kind of maybe lack of clarity or some confusion that needs working through, or a sense of, you know, imagination, escapism, these sorts of things, you know, that are, as each planet moving through Virgo opposes Neptune, you can be dealing with those themes on this axis. So this axis of the mind, this axis of teaching and learning, this axis of travel, this axis of our, you know, our perceptions and our worldviews, those kinds of things, right? There can be some tension going on there, some confusion to work through, some reality checks, that kind of thing going on for you, Cancer. So, okay, I think you know, oh, there's always, you know, as I say, there's always more I could say, but I think that gives you something to go on, something that's just popping into my head here, so I'll say it anyway, is that there may be some kind of a lot of communication going on with siblings, or again peers, or community members, revolving around teaching and learning, or perceptions and ideologies, a lot of or travel, you know, those kinds of conversations could be happening, and there could be some details to work out there. So anyways, that's for you, Cancer rising, Cancer sun and moon. And we're going to move on to Gemini now, where Gemini, Virgo season hits your fourth house. So every year at this time during Virgo season, there tends to be more of a focus on, or more motivation for you, centered around the fourth house of your home, your place of living, your family, your roots, your ancestry, your sense of emotional security, your relationship to nurturing female figures in your life. Often, you know, like it could be parents in general, but oftentimes it's mother. Real estate, these sorts of things, right? Tend to pull focus during Virgo season for you. So this can be, in a very sort of like literal, practical sense, this can be a time of year when you are doing all the Virgo things in relation to home. So you are tidying, organizing, purging, you know, fine tuning, analyzing, researching all things home, family, you know, real estate, those sorts of things. Getting your literal house in order. That is very, very much Virgo in the fourth house, right? So, you know, taking care of like your private life as well is the fourth house. And then we've got Neptune across the sky in your 10th house, Neptune in Pisces. And so this is like where this sense of nebulousness can come in, or lack of clarity, or confusion, or, you know, fantasy, imagination, all those things we talked about in the intro. So listen to the intro for sure if you want more details around this piece. But you know, that 10th house is the public house, as opposed to the fourth house, which is the private house, right, in your chart. And so whereas the fourth house, one of the things it speaks to is like the legacy you have been left. The 10th house is like the legacy you wish to leave, right? And so, or things like your career and your public reputation and your worldly ambition and your relationship to authority and your own authority, and these sorts of things are 10th house. And so with Neptune sitting there, there's this tension between the 4th and 10th houses, and some confusion potentially that needs to be worked through there. But there's other ways this can play out as well. And so listen to the intro if you want to know more about that. So that is for you, Gemini. And we're going to move on to Taurus now, where we have Virgo season highlighting your fifth house. So every year at this time, you know, your motivation centers around fifth house themes. So, and you know, where the sun goes, our attention is drawn. We get an opportunity to shine. We are encouraged to put our kind of our focus there, right? We may be drawn in by some ideal kind of vision that we have, but for you, that it's that fifth house, and that speaks to things like children. So, you know, your children or children you are associated with or work with. It could be things like anything around children, like pregnancy and you know, childbirth and conception and that sort of thing. It can be it can very much be about how you have fun in life, what sparks joy for you, right? Like how you bring pleasure into your experience is fifth house. It is which often includes our creative pursuits, right, and our creative self-expression, or our hobbies and special interests and those sorts of things as well. And so this is what's motivating you during Virgo season. This is where your attention is being drawn during Virgo season. And Virgo trines Taurus, right? And so usually this is a nice harmonious energy, all things being equal, of course, not knowing what else, you know, is going on in your personal chart. But, and so this may be a time when, you know, there's nice energy going on with children, in relation to children. There can be some enjoyment going on. You know, maybe you're engaged in some pleasure pursuits at this time of year, or you're organizing fun, right? That's Virgo in the fifth house. You're organizing children to maybe get them ready to go back to school. You are getting your creative life in order in some way, shape, or form. You know, that's very possible. And there's this attention to the details in that area of life. But we have this opposition to Neptune, right? Neptune and Pisces across the sky in your 11th house. And as the sun and, you know, we've had the other planets that are moving through Virgo oppose Neptune, we get this push-pull, right? This need for compromise, this need for balancing these two areas of life. And we have this influence of Neptune, which I spoke about in the intro. So listen to the intro for more details, but just briefly can bring about this sense of, you know, nebulousness, fogginess, illusion, deception, but also imagination and fantasy and spirituality and magic as well. So nevertheless, for you, Taurus, this influence is hitting your 11th house of the group of friends, of your supporters and your allies, and you know, your hopes and dreams for the future. And so there can be some lack of clarity there, some confusion, some need for you know, getting clear on something, but also that can play out in other ways as well, which I spoke about in the intro when I talked about the Neptune piece. So have a listen for that. This can, sometimes I see this fifth 11th house axis as the experiences that you're having. It's like, it's more about like your children and their friends rather than it is about you and your friends or the group, right? Sometimes that's the way this plays out. So that may be the case for you. Okay, so we're going to move on to Aries now, where Aries, you have Virgo season hitting your 6th house. And so during Virgo season, when the sun is moving through your 6th house, it is drawing your attention and your sense of motivation, and encouraging you to shine in this area of life, right? Which is all about your daily affairs. It's all about your day-to-day work. It's all about that sense of hard work and toil, really, and checking off the ticky boxes in day-to-day life, right? The daily grind is the sixth house. Also speaks very much to like our health and illnesses potentially, our health routines, how we are in service, these sorts of things. And so for you, this may be a time of year when typically, for example, you may feel called to do some sort of like a cleanse, um, for your body, or you may be reevaluating your health routines, or it could be a time of year when you have a lot of like medical appointments, or you're seeing a lot of health professionals, or you're setting those up because you want to, you know, take care of those details as far as your health goes, or you're taking care of a lot of details on the day to day, setting up schedules and lists and daily routines, and taking care of all the mundane little details that we have to take care of in our daily work and our daily lives. And that work can be paid or unpaid work, right? And so these are the kinds of things that are drawing focus for you during Virgo season. And it could be around pets as well. Sometimes I neglect to mention that, but that is a possibility in the sixth house. So there could be a lot going on as far as pets go, for example. But across the sky in your 12th house is Neptune in Pisces. And we talked about this opposition in the intro. So please listen to the intro beyond what I'm telling you here, because I go into more detail when I talk about Neptune there. But in general, Neptune is bringing this sense of, it can play out in a variety of ways, but a sense of fogginess or illusion or deception, or sometimes Neptune brings lethargy as well. But it could be, confusion. I don't know if I said that already, or a sense of spirituality, of magic, of imagination and fantasy, right? Or escapism, even, particularly in the 12th house. And so there's this working out of some kind of tension or some need for balance or compromise when it comes to your daily grind versus how you escape the daily grind, so to speak. Versus it could be having to do with your mental and spiritual health. It could be having to do with how you care for yourself, and sometimes it's like healthcare settings in general, whether that be something like you're directly involved in, or as other people in your life are, or you work in that kind of a setting. The 12th house can be places like hospitals and rehab facilities and spiritual retreat centers and these kinds of things, right? But it's also this sense of just like how we escape the everyday. So that axis is being lit up by the Neptune opposition to the planets moving through Virgo. But in general, Virgo season is shining a light on those sixth house themes that we talked about for you, Aries. So I'm going to move on to Pisces now. And Pisces, for you, Virgo season shines a light on your seventh house of close personal relationships and contracts and agreements, right? So your significant others, marriage partner, close friends and family that you have a one-to-one connection with, rivals sometimes as well. Speak to the seventh house, the rivals that we know we're in a rivalry with, and contracts and agreements, right, is seventh house. And so during Virgo season, you are motivated to pay attention to these things in some way. This is where, you are encouraged to shine your light. This is where you can be focusing on some sort of ideal vision that you have for partnership, for contracts and agreements, these sorts of seventh house themes, right? And there's a sense of like a taking care of business here with this being Virgo for you. The Virgo house, there's details, and there's or it could be like your partner or a partner of yours. It could be a business partner too, but could be a significant other that is going through a very Virgo kind of experience, or they're the ones who are really focused on, you know, taking care of details and analyzing and researching and doing the fine tuning, and potentially, maybe being critical in some ways as well, or anxious in some ways, or is, just being very, or like doing, they're really focused on doing like a purging of like the house or something like that. So, and then you've got Neptune sitting there across the sky in your first house, because Neptune's in your sign, Pisces. And so, I probably don't have to say much about this to you because you've been dealing with this transit, Neptune through the first house, if you're a Pisces rising. And so, this can, particularly with Neptune in the first house, it can zap your energy some. It can make you feel lethargic and tired on and off, depending on what's going on. But energy can wax and wane. There can be a bit of a struggle with, sometimes not seeing yourself clearly in some ways, because the first house is the house of self, right? There can be some lack of clarity around like your physical vitality and wellness and that sort of thing, that you're struggling with. But this is generally the axis of relationship, the axis of self and other, right? And your interaction with other people, your sense of identity versus, the other people in your life. And so Neptune there can cause, this can be a period of time where we've got these oppositions happening, where there can be a need for compromise and balance in relationship, where there may be a bit of push and pull that goes on there, a bit of, some reality checks. But it can also be a time of, like, I mentioned in the intro, where there is some magic that happens, as well. So I think that's enough to go on, Pisces. I'm going to move on to Aquarius now, where Aquarius, we have Virgo sitting in your 8th house, right? So Virgo season every year shines the light on your 8th house. And the 8th house is a house that has to do with your entanglements with other people. So with the sun shining its light there, it is motivating you in some way. It is drawing your attention. It is pulling focus on these themes of your entanglements with other people. Well, what does that mean more specifically? Well, it's things, oftentimes we think of it as like other people's resources. So it's a time when you may be focused on things like your themes around inheritance, wills, taxes, debt, insurance, loans, income that comes to you from other sources, not rather than like money you make yourself from your own skills and talents. It can be or money that you have to pay out to other, like the government or something like that. It has to do with these notions of death and rebirth, right? It has to do with your deep psychological kind of, like the skeletons in the closet, your psychological wounding and healing, and the depths of your psyche. And so this is where the sun is drawing your attention over this next month. And this is where Virgo season is calling you to take care of some details here, to get organized in relation to these themes, to analyze and research and look at things with a critical or a discerning, is a better word, a discerning, eye, to take care of things like, taxes and insurance needs and things like that. Maybe a time when you're going over a will, or you're involved in some kind of like dealing with an inheritance or something like that. You may be the executor of somebody's will or something like that, and so you have to deal with the details of that. That's just one way that could play out. It could be a time when you are seeking out and doing some research on some, looking for like a therapist to work with, for example. So those are all things that you could be focusing on, to name a few. That is not an exhaustive list by any means. But then we have Neptune over there in your second house of your personal finances, of how you make your money in the world, of how you sustain yourself and get your basic needs met, of how you value yourself, of your general sense of values and what you place worth on, right? So is the second house, and Neptune there can cause some confusion and delusion and deception and lack of clarity. But it can also bring about imagination and magic and fantasy and spirituality. And so listen to the introduction to get a better sense of how that could play out for you. But this is the axis that this is happening on, right? This axis of resources, this axis of sort of form. Second house, like material form and material kind of reality and material possessions and money and all that. And like, transformation, or your personal resources and the resources of other people, like I mentioned. And resources, we often think of resources as only about money, but that can also involve your time and energy as well, right? Those are resources as well. So, okay, so I think that gives you enough to go on, Aquarius. I'm going to move on to Capricorn now, where Capricorn, we have Virgo season, lighting up your ninth house. And so at this time of year, your attention is drawn towards ninth house themes of the way you look at the world, the way you perceive the world, your worldview, so to speak. It can also be very much about travel, foreign people and places, and what you learn from them. Whether that be through travel and adventure, and or whether it be through like armchair travel, like taking classes, reading, watching documentaries, whatever. This can be a back to school kind of vibe, particularly when we're talking about like this notion of higher learning. So, college, university, kind of beyond the basics sort of learning and teaching that goes on. It can be about, the ninth house is just like, in a nutshell, it's about expanding our horizons in some way. And so this is what draws your attention around this time of year, right? This is what motivates you. This is what you are seeking, some kind of ideal in relation to that whole idea of expanding your horizons, right? And so that's what's going on for you, Capricorn. So it might be like, you're starting a new program at college or university or elsewhere, but or you're maybe teaching, or you're focusing on something that's, you're planning on publishing, or there's something like that going on, or you are having some kind of new experience that expands your horizon in some way, And so, for example, like my daughter's a Capricorn rising. She's about to start high school, right? Opens up a whole new world for her. So it's that kind of thing. And so, she'll start high school during Virgo season. And so that's a really good example. But then there is Neptune sitting in your third house across the sky in this area that has to also, it speaks to teaching and learning and communications and your daily affairs and what surrounds you on the day to day, and exchanges of information and, your thinking and all of that. And so there can be a bit of confusion to sort out. There can be some lack of clarity there, some reality checks, but there can also be some real, magic and fantasy and imagination that happens. And so definitely listen to the introduction where I speak about the Neptune piece in a little bit more detail to give you some more to go on as far as that piece goes. But really the sun there and the other planets moving through Virgo are really drawing your attention to those ninth house themes, like I mentioned. So that's for you, Capricorn. Next, we're moving on to Sagittarius, where we have Virgo season lighting up your 10th house, which is a very public house for you, right? The 10th house is your career, your worldly ambitions, how you kind of are viewed, like in a very public light. It is about it's about legacy, the legacy you wish to leave. It's about authority and authority figures and your own sense of authority, right? And so for you, this is the time of year when there are motivations around these things. There is, these things draw your attention. They pull focus. You're encouraged to shine in this 10th house. And so you may be spending a lot of time and energy in a very Virgoan fashion, like getting down to the nitty gritty, getting in a back to work routine, for example, or, there's a lot of, we're an election has been called here, a federal election. And so all the candidates are, doing their surveying and a lot of communicating and research and analyzing and strategizing and taking care of details in a very Virgoan fashion, right? But in a very public kind of way, which is 10th house. So I'm trying to think of how else, another example that I could give to you here. It might be that you're focusing somehow on, like maybe you're looking to have some kind of career advancement, like a promotion or something like that. And so you're working on the details of your resume or some kind of project that you can, that can allow you to shine in your career, right? That's an example. So that is what's happening for you, Sag. And then, of course, you've got Neptune down there in your 4th house of home, family, roots, place of living, sense of emotional security, real estate, these sorts of things. And that Neptune there is making things a little foggy and confusing perhaps. There's some lack of clarity, or some sense of like the ideal, some sense of fantasy, imagination, magic as well. Listen to the intro for when I talk more in detail about this piece. But essentially there is some sort of, there may be some reality checks, but at very least some maybe a lack of clarity that needs to be worked out, some push and pull that's happening, a sense of compromise that needs to happen between your 10th house, right? Your public life and your 4th house, your private life in a sense, right? Like career and family. Those are a simple way to put it. Okay, so for you, Sagittarius, we're going to leave it there. I'm going to move on to Scorpio now, where Scorpio, you have Virgo season lighting up your 11th house. And so this is a time of year when there can be a lot of motivation or a lot of attention drawn to themes of the group, of friends, of allies and supporters of your hopes and dreams for the future. And, there can be like a very Virgo flavor to this. So a lot of communicating that can happen. Virgo's ruled by Mercury, right? With friends, for example, or networks or supporters. But there can be this like a lot of analyzing and researching and organizing and this has like a back to school kind of vibe to it in terms of like working through like I think of my son as a Scorpio rising and like like picking classes or just like comparing schedules with your friends or making new alliances or but there's a regimented sense to it because it is in Virgo, or a sense of there can be like some sort of being in service to friends in some way, shape, or form as well that goes on. with, you know, Virgo in the 11th house, that motivates you or encourages you. But there is this focus, right, on the group in general and on your allies and supporters. So across the sky from Virgo sits Pisces, where Neptune is traveling for the long haul. And as the planets in Virgo, you know, move through Virgo, they oppose Neptune in Pisces. And so we talked about this in more detail in the intro, so definitely listen to that. But generally there is this push and pull going on, this need for compromise and bringing things together in terms of your 11th house, which we just spoke about, and the 5th house, which is where Neptune sits, right? Which speaks to children, which speaks to your creative pursuits, how you have fun in life, you know, your hobbies and special interests, these sorts of things. And so there can be some confusion going on around that, some lack of clarity, some deception, but also some magic and some fantasy and some imagination. But there can also be, like I was saying before, and I'm seeing this more and more, I've seen this many, many times over the last year or so, where the 11th, 5th house axis sometimes speaks to, like if you're a parent, sometimes it speaks to your kids and their friends, right? It's not necessarily personal. So look for that potentially as well. So that is the general focus for you over Virgo season, Scorpio, that 11th house, right? On those themes. So I'm going to leave that there for you, and we're going to move on to, last but not least in this instance, is Libra. And so Libra, you've got Virgo season lighting up the behind the scenes for you, right? Which is the 12th house. And so if you're a Virgo, or sorry, if you're a Libra sun, then every year at this time, you have the sun moving through your 12th house, just about to move into your sorry, if you're a Libra rising, let me circle back. Neptune, playing with my brain. Anyway, if you're a Libra rising, you've got the sun moving through your 12th house during Virgo season. And then the sun will enter your 1st house, and there'll be this sense of like rebirth. But when the sun is moving through our 12th house, it can feel, it's a time where we can need to feel a little bit like we need to retreat a bit, like we need to rest, like we need to isolate and have some solitude and escape a little, right? Or that we are like, that solar energy of the sun is shining behind closed doors, so to speak, right? What's motivating us are things that are unseen, not necessarily obvious to the outside world. It could be a time when there's a focus on like mental and spiritual health. It can be a time when there's a focus on convalescence, where we're dealing with places that are behind, you know, that are sort of tucked away from the world. Like we're dealing with like some kind of institutions like hospitals or retreat centers or hospices or rehab facilities or something like that. It can be a time where we're dealing with things like endings and losses and things wrapping up. It can be a time where your spiritual life is particularly sort of active and motivating, or your dream life in some way. It can be a time when, you know, that sort of solar energy and power is just a little bit more tucked away, so to speak. And that's a natural part of the yearly cycle, right? Everybody has that. Like, as a Virgo rising, I just had this when the sun moved through Leo. And so every year when the sun moves through Leo, which is my 12th house, I get this sense where I need to have some time for retreat. And oftentimes there's a bit of a struggle there, but because I don't get as much as I feel like I need. But that's what the motivation is, right? Or the ideal sort of thing that the sun is bringing there. So that's what's going on for you as a Libra rising. And so you know, try to use this in a kind of constructive way. And I will say to you that across the sky, you've got Neptune in your 6th house, right? And we spoke about the Neptune piece in the intro. So listen to that to for kind of more context. But with Neptune moving through your 6th house and those planets opposing as they move through Virgo, there is this sense of something needing, some balance needing to be struck there, or some compromise, or a sense of push and pull that's happening between this could be matters of health, mental, spiritual health. This could be the daily grind versus how you escape that, or your need to escape it. This could be, health issues that are a bit sort of nebulous in some way, and there could be some confusion around that. There can be, it can be around pets potentially too, the sense of like maybe confusion, or Neptune, as I say in the intro, can bring lack of clarity, fogginess, deception, illusion, all of these things. But it can also bring a sense of magic and spirituality and imagination and these sorts of things, right? And so that's a potential too. But listen to the intro for more details. And so final word I'll say here, Libra, is if you can retreat during Virgo season and get a little downtime, then it's a good time to do that. It's a good time to care for yourself in that way. So I'm going to leave that there. That's all 12 signs, with a bit of a focus on Virgo season and that Neptune opposition. And next week we'll talk about the Virgo new moon that's happening. So more on Virgo, but it will be specific to the new moon and how that's playing out, right? So take good care, and I will see you next week. All right, bye for now.